Hello. Good morning.
Good morning. Can we start now?
This is for real, I think. Okay. Stefan, you go.
Well, very warm welcome in the workshop Accessibility and Diversity. Let's have an inspiring panel with fantastic guests in the next hour, which is live stream to all over the world, hopefully beyond the borders of Europe. Who is talking and who is hosting and who is moderating? I would like to introduce Julia Binja Hesse. She's director and dramaturg, works internationally, and she's the vice president of ACT Germany.
Yes, hello. Thank you, Stefan, and a very warm welcome also from my part. I'm very happy and honored to be co-hosting this session with Stefan, my colleague, who is the artistic director of Junges Schauspielhaus Düsseldorf and a member of the executive committee of ACT International. Anything else about him, I think you might find in the program of the forum, or you can ask him later in the virtual bar. So just one word, this goofy looking helmet is because it's really noisy in my place and I don't want you to be bothered. So I'm sorry I look like this today. Now I have the immense pleasure to shortly introduce the fantastic guests we are having in our workshop today. And I would like to start with Yvette Hardy. Yvette Hardy is a South African theater director, producer, educator, and advocate focusing on theater for young audiences. She is the president of the Global TYA Association, ACT International, and is using this position in the past and present to create opportunities for artistic exchange and cross-cultural collaboration around the world. And especially, she is making theater an open space and stage for diverse voices and stories. Welcome, Yvette.
Farnas Ababi. He is artistic director of the famous Unga Klara Theater in Stockholm. She works as a director in Sweden and internationally for 20 years. And the way how she deals with access and diversity changed the landscape, at least in Sweden. So we are very curious to hear about what you are thinking and doing in your theater and what you're proposing. Welcome.
Hello, and last but not least, I would like to introduce Constanza Makras, who is the artistic director of the internationally acknowledged company Dorky Park in Berlin. It's an interdisciplinary ensemble that works with dance, text, live music, and film, and consequently, her creations not only combine artists from various disciplines, but often are site-specific pieces and installations. And one of Constanza's issues is radical change of the theater sector towards more diversity, less barriers, and more artistic courage. So let's see how this goes.
Welcome, Constanza, but I can't see her. So maybe she's getting in, and let's start with the issue of accessibility, and let's start with Yvette Hardy. Let us say that every person has the right to participate in the arts, and access means to create a space for everybody to participate, having choices, but maybe we are far away from that. How can we build better access? My question to Yvette is, how can we make theaters more accessible, and maybe what can we learn from the theater for the young audiences where you know a lot about from all over the world? So how can we create spaces that are more accessible, and what can we learn from the theater for young audiences? Yvette.
Thank you. Thanks, Stefan. And thanks so much for this opportunity. I think to start off, obviously, we recognize that the European theatre space is incredibly diverse. And, we're not talking about when we talk about access to something, we're not talking about a one-size-fits-all kind of access, because we have to recognize that we're dealing with everything from the independent freelancer through to the permanent repertory companies, through to the big state-funded institutions. And all of these spaces may need to deal with access in different ways. I do think, though, that one of the key things that needs to happen anywhere in the world is the development of a functional kind of artistic ecosystem, so that these different parts of the theatre space and institutions and organizations speak to one another and work with one another in strategizing. And so this is what makes this conversation such an exciting one, because hopefully it's bringing together all the different role players from these different sectors to try and construct some kind of common vision. I think the second thing is to think about how we can reclaim the space of theatre as being really central to public discourse, as that space in which ideas are tested, are reframed, that it's that space of meeting and exchange between all parts of society, and that in the process of that meeting and exchange, we are able to do community building, essentially, and forge new communities where perhaps those communities were not possible before. So I think that right now, one of the key things is to be outward looking rather than inward looking as a theatre community. We need to have real curiosity about our audiences, about who they are or who they might be, why they are or aren't interested in what it is that we are creating, and how to have a genuine dialogue with that audience. And I think that one of the things that sets theatre for young audiences apart from, and in some respects ahead of, the rest of the theatre scene is specifically its genuine curiosity and interest in its audience. You know, theatre for young audiences recognizes that theatre is not unidirectional. It is a communication. It is a conversation. It's an act of collective meaning making. And in order to communicate successfully with that audience, we have to engage long before the work reaches the stage, in the process of dreaming the work, in the process of making the work, in the process of empowering the audience to engage with some of the processes that we might be using. So essentially to almost democratize the process of art making, and of then being active respondents to whatever the work is, and to then have an impact on that work. So that the work is in constant exchange with its audience as it's being received. Often when we talk about an engaged audience in TYA, we're not only thinking about an audience that has its eyes wide open and its full attention on the stage. What we're also talking about is an audience that actively participates in some way in the performance, after the performance, in some activity related to the performance. And then we see that engagement continue into the everyday life of the child. So often we'll get reports from parents, from teachers, of how, you know, ideas that were teased out in the production are emerging in children's play or in their conversation long after the event. So it's the sense of theatre really being embedded in the society. And I think that one of the ways that TYA does this is that it has always gone about engaging its audiences in non-traditional spaces, as well as in the theatre spaces. So we've sought out audiences in creches, in schools, in medical facilities, in after-school programs, in refugee camps, in community spaces. And now during COVID, in people's homes through Zoom or through social media platforms. So it takes theatre into these alternative spaces, and then in so doing, creates collaborations with unlikely partners to reach new audiences. And I think that's also important, is looking outward, looking beyond just the theatre community for our partnerships, finding the ways in which we can engage with the broader society in order to access a wider audience. And then, as I mentioned with TYA, is this idea of really working with the audience. And I think, you know, so often we will look at an audience and we'll say, oh, we're playing to the converted, we're playing to those people who've been engaged with the arts before. So you see someone who has studied the arts goes on to be a good audience member. Well, doesn't that tell us something? That actually we need people to be engaged with the actual doing of the arts, to demystify that, that kind of engagement of what theatre might be, so that they can feel the transformation for themselves. They can feel the kind of magic that we are creating and understand something of it in order to want to access it more deeply. So I think really seeing audiences as a partner to the work, as active co-creators, as dramaturgs, as part of the conversation is vital. And then I think also, and this comes back to the question of space, is in the South African experience, you know, so often we are working outside of that specially designed cocoon with all the technology and design that is possible within a theatre space. But we nevertheless are making magic, and that magic might be happening in a rough way on township streets or in a school classroom. But what that magic does is it transforms a space that perhaps was a space of poverty or of lack or of conflict. It transforms it into something else. And what that does is it empowers the audience to see that change is possible. So it makes theatre a real interaction with the society, and you know, potentially a profound contributor to social change. So yes, I mean, I think those are some of the things that I wanted to draw attention to just as in an opening statement, that we really do need to think about space, we need to think about process, and we need to think about all the barriers to access that we might be putting up, you know, in order to fully diversify and make our work accessible.
Thank you very much, Yvette. There's so many things to discuss in this dialogue, talking about looking beyond the places, or more participation, demystify our sector to have more access to it. So there's many things to do. Are there already some questions from the Q&A, from the chat? Julia?
Not so far, no, but maybe we could tell you that there is the chance of all of you who are in the auditorium here. You can put your questions to Yvette or later Farnas and Constanza to us in the chat, and then I will grab them and ask them here, and Yvette and the others can answer to them. So if you have any question right now, just pop it in, or otherwise I suggest maybe we move on, and if you have any question, just write it and we will ask later. It's okay?
Yes.
Perfect.
So then I would pass over to Farnas Ababi for this moment. We will come back to Yvette in this session. Farnas, you changed your theater when you started to be artistic director. So can you tell us, because I see it a bit of a role model of more accessibility or diversity, but let's firstly talk about accessibility. So what did you do in Unga Clara when you started your work, and what are your experience with the question of more accessibility?
Thank you, Stefan. And good morning, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to this important and very interesting conference. My name is Farnas Ababi, and I've been working as a stage director and playwright in Sweden for about 20 years. And I've worked a lot with diversity and inclusion, and actively worked to make the Swedish theatre a space for inclusion and for diversity. Trying to work with the whiteness in Swedish theatre mainly, trying to change what stories and whose stories are being told, and also changing who is telling the story on stage and behind the stage. And my plays tend to focus on existential topics such as identity, migration, exile, queerness, and power structures. And 6 years ago, I was appointed the artistic leadership of Unga Clara, which is a renowned theatre for young audiences. And it's located in the city center of Stockholm. And it has been a groundbreaking theatre since it was founded in 1975 by legendary director Susanne Osten. And the theatre is built on the idea that children are fully capable of understanding and experiencing art, and that art doesn't necessarily need to be edifying or wholesome or even kind. It's also, we also work with the idea that the children want to talk about so-called difficult topics, the things that adults might want to protect them from. So Unga Klara is also famous for doing plays on themes that are considered to be too tough for children to deal with. We have a history of working very closely to our audience, and we strive to have an intersectional perspective on power structures, also including the child perspective in this, and acknowledging that children are a marginalized group in society that have very little power over their lives. So we also need to actively have this in mind when we work with our audience.
Farnas?
Yes?
I have the question, how did you institutionalize this intersectional perspective, including the audience? Is there a forum? Is there a gremium where you discuss, or how did you do it as a process?
We do it in different ways, you might say. We have our method is mainly built on three pillars. We use the perspective. We acknowledge the power that we have when we meet the audience, and we also work very closely with the audience. So we have many meetings with the audience during the rehearsals, but also before we start rehearsing, even maybe before the idea is born. And when we meet the audience, we don't work with trying to show them the theater to ask them what is good and bad. It's more a conversation, maybe based on the topics of the play, sometimes just to understand what the important things in their lives are, and trying to make them more a part of the process making of the theater.
Are children suggesting issues and topics that you raise, or are you doing, are you sometimes getting suggestions?
Sometimes they do, and sometimes we have our own idea of what we want to talk about, and we do some sort of, we try to examine the topic from their perspective and see how to get close to it, and what part of the topic might be important for them in their lives. But it's not so much the actual choosing of the topics, more as to find a way to communicate.
Feedback.
It's communication, but this is also made possible in our rehearsal processes, because we work with longer rehearsal processes than other theaters do. And we also work with trying to get input from other expertise areas and the experts and researchers that might be connected to the topics that we have chosen for the play that we're working on.
Are you sometimes leaving your theater and going to rural areas or to other places?
Yes, we do. We work very closely towards the schools. So we have a lot of contact with the pedagogues and the teachers in order to get the children to come to the theater, or we go to the schools, meet the children, and we also do other sorts of visits. We are based in Stockholm, but 2 years ago we were appointed by the Swedish government, we were appointed a national theater for young audiences, which means that we now have a national assignment. So we work, our work is aimed towards all the children in Sweden and not only in Stockholm. So we do go to other areas as well.
Questions from the chat, from Julia?
I have one question. I don't know for who it is, but either of you can maybe answer. Are there any special theater programs or fundings for projects focusing on better accessibility? So is there support from the politics?
I can answer for Sweden. There are different projects and different funding that you can apply for. They are not always aimed at the artistic expression or the topic of the theme. They could be more about how to practically make the theater more accessible in terms of different types of aids for the audience that might need. Maybe support for children with autism, nonverbal aid support, or maybe working with translation into sign language or blind interpretation, which we often also try to do. We sometimes do it in the theater, but we always try to collaborate so that we can make this possible at Unga Klara as well.
We will come back. Yeah, Julia?
No, I don't, if Yvette wants to add something from South Africa, maybe?
Sure. I mean, within South Africa, access is a very important issue. And a lot of times funding will be determined by what audience you're going to be able to speak to in that funding. So, for example, the provincial areas that are away from the formal theatre structures tend to be prioritized in the funding at the moment. And spaces that are non-formal spaces are also prioritized at the moment, because there's a feeling that while the theatres that are in cities can to some extent work on a commercial model, if we're talking about the deeper rural areas or less served provinces, they need the support. So a lot of funding is going towards that kind of access.
Mm-hmm. So let's integrate Constanza Macras into the dialogue for the moment. We will come back. Constanza, in your work, you said to me that is Constanza already there?
Yes, I'm there.
Yeah, can we see you?
Okay.
Constanza, you sometimes said that theater needs looking at accessibility and diversity needs a radical change. You said it's not consequent what is done until now in the theaters, and you do it different. You try to do it different. So what is your critical and radical position, and what are you doing different?
Well, I don't know if it's radical. I think it's just part of like understanding what is diversity, what is accessibility, and what is called state theater. When I was explaining the example of the Staatstheater in Germany, the state theaters that are I have to say, is he gone? I have to say goodbye. Shit. Okay. For example, like if I was working in Düsseldorf, it's a city with a big community of like people from Ghana, a big Japanese community, and there is nothing in the theater that speaks for people from these countries or these cultures, and so there is no connection from the state theater to the community. So the city doesn't go to the theater. Basically, that's what happens. That you cannot call it the state theater, and then people don't go there because it just focus in one very specific audience that is playing shows that are more than 100 years old. And don't talk about the dynamism of a city, and it's very difficult for people to understand immigration when they're not at risk. When people talks about the refugees and people, they think this is and they don't even address the communities that are living in the city, like culturally. So you want those communities need to be addressed culturally, and it's not as minorities permanently, but as citizens of the place where they inhabit. They're not it's always this sort of tokenism, in the idea of inclusion, and it's always becoming a little bit token, like a little bit like, okay, now we have somebody who's diverse, you know what I mean? And if this person who's diverse, it should be part of the landscape, not and not just addressed as diverse. Women, we don't to be addressed as women all the time. I mean, although we're women, of course, but for example, for me, I find it very, very simple example, that I find it very complicated when people says Kamala Harris is the first female president, like vice president, and I find it like, well, she's a lawyer, she does all these other things, you know what I mean? And I think it's also like a problem of how we focus on differences. I mean, I think some things they have to we have to start to normalize in the good sense that we need more things, need to be more inclusive, but like part of our life, like inclusive as part of our life, inclusive, not as like, oh look, we're including somebody and we make like a thing about it. I found that very, that's why it's always like this thing that people also make special shows to address communities, and it's like, no, this is like always like, making like a big marker of like, yeah, I mean, there is differences, but there's also a lot of similitudes, and there's also like these very subtle ways of people including themselves in a society, which are interesting, and that we always oversee. So for me, that's like what is it, what I'm trying, to when I work, I'm trying to think about that, like I look at the people I work, not like, oh, and now I'm like anthropologically, because it has something like that European theater, that it goes like, oh, look, this is the people from here or there, and I'm an immigrant myself, and I'm like, I feel like, okay, well, I mean, my German's still not very good. My son is always correcting me. you know, and I'm like very much like an example, like my grandparents were in Argentina, my European grandparents who went to Argentina, you know, and started the whole life and they didn't speak Spanish, you know. I mean, and where are we? We're a country which was colonized, you know, and it was like, you know, so, you know, histories are so complex. We cannot just, you know, people, our backgrounds, each background is very complicated, you know, and I feel like we need to, you know, I think like addressing the difference all the time and putting the point on the difference, sometimes it's not exactly the way I will go about it, you know.
Mm-hmm. Can you explain the word tokenism a bit more? What do you mean?
Yeah, it's like, you know, like you're like, oh, we need a woman who is not from Europe, you know, and then you are like the only one, you know, basically, and that they call it token, you know. I mean, like, oh, we need a person from racially diverse, you know, we need, you know, so it's like always like having like, you know, like you're like the person who, as yourself, you're like the sort of like the flag of inclusion, you know. So then you're like, you know, you are like held as in, but at the same time show, you know, like you're the included person and the only one kind of thing, you know. So, and I mean, I had it, by example, you know, I don't know, like recently I was holding a speech in a theater festival, and they called me 2 days before the opening, and it was very late actually, you know, the opening speech, and it's because probably they realized that there was no women anyway, like they only have one artist women, and they were like, oh wow, we need a woman who's not European, you know, and it really felt that way, you know. And I mean, and this happened to me not one time but many times, you know, but I mean, I'm still what considers, you know, white, you know, so it's like, you know, then I mean, but still, you know, I'm not European, you know, and it's like I feel like those, you know, those kind of bells ringing behind, which is very uncomfortable, you know, because I mean, at the end, you know, I'm doing artistic work, and I mean, and what is important is what you think and what you do, you know, I mean, and what you create as an artist, you know, and yes, so it's a bit, you know, like when you're called like 2 days before the opening with something that is planned for a really long time, it is funny actually. And then you know, it's like an important speech, that one, you know, it's the only speech you held, you know, there's not even politicians talking, you know, so you better say something interesting, I think. But it was okay, you know, I was really happy. Then I said, okay, wow, this is exactly what I need to talk about, you know, why there's no more inclusion of women in the program, which is very obvious, you know, but that there was only one female artist in the whole program in a big European festival.
I would be curious to read.
You know, how these things how can this still happen? You know, how this can still happen? You know, and for me, it's absurd. It's like, you know, we cannot even like, you know, it is like we need to like really be very strict. I mean, in everyday's conduct and life of like way of we work as artists and programmers or whatever, is we need to include that. It's like a daily practice. It's something that you until, you know, it becomes part of your, you know, functioning, you know, the functioning of your structure, you know, and that's the only way you can start to change it. So
any questions from the chat, Julia?
There is a question, but it's to Farnas, so I don't know, do you want another question to Constanza first, or?
Yeah, let's wait for that for a moment. Just one question, last thing, because we start to go into the complete dialogue. Constanza, in your work, it's dance and theater, so it's not using so much the languages. So there's a lot of possibilities for access. How do you use that language for more accessibility?
Like movement language or speaking language?
No, the moving language. It's
moving language is like, okay, well, because I use both, no? I mean, I use also like a lot of text. I mean, text is always like performing different languages, you know, and it's subtitle, and, you know, that, I mean, and then, and movement language is something that we develop, you know, we work with casts, which are like, you know, as many times like from many different places, and we looked for like a common, you know, when it's about something, you know, like when we think about certain qualities of movement that they can picture, because for me, dance is very abstract in a way, you know, it's that you cannot, you know, enunciate with movement what you will do with words, and that's a good thing actually. So, I mean, what we look for is like for example, if we're like working on the subject of memory or whatever, like, you know, we just look for things that unify our, the people's dance style in some kind of like lingering idea, you know, and then you can see people has everybody their take on movement. So you see a lot of how people naturally moves, but, you know, they also like move together into some kind of creation, you know, and I think that creates, you know, I work in creating like an artistic space where everybody feels connected, and with their input, with their movement, So I think like for me, it's more like finding this common place where even because every movement language is different, because I don't come and say to people, okay, you go to the right, you go to the left. I work with their own movement, So I just basically make them develop things, through ideas I have about, improvisation ideas or movement ideas, but where they found their own voice within those ideas, So it's not like I'm telling people what to do exactly. I don't, So for me, it's more like how to mediate that to happen, that it, it has like some kind of coherence, within a concept, and at the same time keeps the individuality of people, and their background.
And not stressing the differences, but stressing the common language that you have in the diversity.
Yeah.
Julia, are there questions in the chat?
Yes, yes. There's actually one open question to all of our panelists, and maybe you could just, as the time is advancing, just give a statement to it, because it's nice. The question is, are there any sticky subjects? Like, what are the difficulties in this area of access, and points that you feel uncomfortable when you're trying to do this in your work?
Well, yeah, there's a lot of things which are difficult to talk about, I mean, like recently I was approached by an actress who talked to me about domestic violence, because she said that she was victim of it. And for me, that's that, I mean, I'm not saying you shouldn't work about that, you should work about that, but it's how contextualize, in which way you work about these subjects, and how you to take the importance, and to be like really honor how important that is. Also, I was approached to direct a show about the murder of Emmett Till, this man who was lynched in America, the black man, and it's like, I felt like as a white director, it was very weird because it was an all black group of like German residents, I mean, okay, they took me as a South American immigrant, but I found it also like, it was for me weird to do that, because I felt like, I just felt that there would have been a black person directing, I felt, in that subject, because it was very specific, and it's like very weird. And, I feel like somehow that was a bit, I didn't feel like it was completely my space. And I also, for example, I think like things you have to honor and be serious about it, always, so, I mean, it's the sticky subject is like how to find your honesty and seriousness about, and without exploiting anything, and because everything, which is difficult has a exploitation corner for me, and this is very, very difficult, and it's like what you need to think about a lot, So.
Farnas, what would you answer to the question?
Well, I think one difficulty that I've met during my work with trying to destroy the white dominancy in the theater is the question of bringing up the privilege, because in order to show what diversity means or representation means, you need to talk about the differences, and what happens with people when they understand their privilege and need to step away from that. And also when we try to aim our work a lot to the underprivileged areas around in Sweden. And when we see the impact of when the young audiences come to the theater and see the actors that they can relate to, it creates some sort of, sometimes when we do the performances, the children, when they stay and they want to talk with the actors, the white actors are very alone because nobody wants to talk to them. Everybody wants to talk to the person that they relate to and that they recognize and that told the story that they recognize. So it's sometimes it's hard to talk about privilege, and this is something, a sticky point, I think, in the work.
Discussion is strongly starting in Germany. Some other countries are much more advanced in this. Yvette, what is your experience with this? Talking about privileges.
Yeah, I mean, building on what Farnas has just said, I mean, I think, we're starting to talk about diversity, and we can't really talk about diversity without talking about equity. And, that's really the key thing. And I think it also speaks back to what Constanza was saying about tokenism, is that if we speak about diversity, it's very easy to fall into that trap of tokenism, of ticking boxes, of, just ensuring that there's some sort of representation of somebody there. But real diversity surely is about real equity, and that requires flexibility, it requires profound change, it requires listening when you would have been talking, you know, it requires a whole lot of shifts in behavior and often in structural formations as well, that can be deeply uncomfortable for people. And I think the other thing that is linked to this is that, and it also links to another point in the chat here. Constanza was talking about creating a kind of finding the commonality between people, and I think that obviously is really important. But I think equally important is holding a space where tension can be apparent and can be expressed, but can be held in tension with one another. So in other words, creating that kind of dialogic dynamic, saying it's okay to disagree. We can be the space of disagreement. We can be the space where we have very different opinions on something, and we can allow those, we can hear them, we can allow those to be expressed in the space, and we don't necessarily have to walk away with a nicely packaged message or, you know, a final conclusion. We can leave that in the hands of the audience. The audience can be the ones who make up their own minds about whatever it is. So I think that sometimes what it means is that we can't refine our messages and sort of dictate how we want our work to be seen. We have to allow it to be kind of open to contradiction, to different points of view, to, you know, to holding these differences in the work itself.
Yeah, what I meant with what I meant with common language, you know, is that like, because we're asking about the language of dance, you know, and I was just explaining very specifically about how people move on stage. I mean, there's always disagreement and tension between the people I work, and I never want to also tell people how they should feel about what they see. You know, I'm always like, you know, for me, my shows, I always say the audience should take their own conclusions, you know, and it's like not. I don't want to, like, I'm not a person who makes like always like very, very conforming work in that sense. No? I mean, but I think like in terms of developing a working space together in which, like, you know, because I work with dancers who are like from many different backgrounds, and, you know, and sometimes how we create movement together has to do with certain, like using certain qualities, and people keep their different ways of being and also like their ways they do things. And, you know, and this tension is always there. It's about how we work together. You know, like for me, it's more about not differentiating the people and say, okay, you do this kind of dance and you do this kind of dance and you do this kind of dance because that's what you do. It's more about that, you know. It's about like not making people move how people expect them to move or because of their background, you know, but amplifying, you know, creating a space also where the ballerina doesn't have to be a ballerina, you know what I mean? It's like she studied that, but she can do something else, you know. It's more about like an artistic space in which people has like different tools to express, you know, like it's more like how we use, develop the stuff, you know, because we're talking specifically about movement. And for me, movement is always like, you know, it could be so many things, you know, and I mean, and it's more about how we develop. But for me, like, you know, these tensions, you know, dramaturgically, the whole thing, there's always, there is disagreements and stuff like that, and tensions, you know, that we work. I mean, but in terms of how the language of dance for me works, it's interesting that it sort of generates also a space within what people has as a background, you know, because otherwise, you know, you're like kind of meant to move like how you move, you know, like you study something, you do something, and then, you know, normally people who work with movement, either they did it very young, or they just do it amateur, or like they have just capacity, you know. People have so many different ways of doing it, you know, and the important thing is that they don't have to be stuck in what you think they should be doing. For me, I mean, that's like that's what I try to create in the working space, but that's what I mean, you know.
Let's go a bit deeper into this diversity issue. We all would agree that every person has the right to be represented on stage and in the audience, and we are far away from that, as you already said. So it's both. It's bringing diverse and different people on the stage and tell stories which are not only the common usual Central European stories, the white stories. We all know Chimamanda Adichie's call about the danger of the single story. And we all know also that you cannot change the audience without changing the program and without changing the persons who are on stage and who are responsible for the whole thing. So it's a bit, like you said, it's a big shift of everything to go towards diversity in equity. So it's clear that it's a huge challenge for also for the the theaters and for the politicians, if they want to bring that forward, for instance, against any new nationalism, because I think diversity is the answer to nationalism. So how can we bring this forward in the next years, maybe on EU level, maybe in our theaters? What would be next steps in this very complex situation to go forward? It's just an open question to all of you, all three of you. Who wants to start? You're muted.
I would like to, for me, well, I mean, this is like something that it should, you know, like, first of all, there should be different, in like institutionally, not just like in the youth part of the theater, because, you know, sometimes in state theaters, you have like the younger ensemble, they make them more progressive things because they say it's just things that just young people cares about, you know, and so then they have like other writers, and sometimes even like, you know, it's a bit sad because sometimes the quality of the writers is not so good, you know, and so they use that space in an experimental way, but also like sometimes they just really don't think about the quality even, you know, and I think that you have to think about that actually, you know, there is amazing writers that you can bring in a house, you know, that like there's a lot of like, just be a little bit, investigate more, you know, like look around what's happening all over the world, who's writing, who's doing what, you know, and then try to bring this stuff to the main stages, to the big stages, with, you know, and let the big actors do like a piece from a young African writer, somebody from, you know, really this like a Latino writer, you know, this in Argentina we have amazing writers as well, you know, like, and start to change, you know, South America. It's like, you know, the world is very broad. There's fantastic writers everywhere, you know, so like decentralized from the European gaze, which is like what dominates the theater, state theater mostly, and start to make it not like something that you do specially, but something that you just really bring a lot of your programming, you know, because if you have like a 70% and 80% of Ibsen and Shakespeare and stuff like that, you know, which has been, you know, and then you say, oh, I'm going to make it a little bit, I'm going to make the cherry tree. These you see a lot, you know, we're going to make the cherry tree orchard and Lopachin is going to be Turkish, you know, and I'm like, no, that's not okay. That's not like modernizing everything. It's not like putting a Russian, you know, like, I mean, this is like, you know, using all fictions to say, yeah, the story still works, but we just need to change, you know, that's like, yeah, of course it still works, the classics, you know, but I mean, but this is like really lazy, you know, just to take, you know, Chekhov forever and then put different faces on it, you know, and that's what a lot of theaters think, that it's progressive, that this is like including immigrants. Okay, we're gonna, and I think this is like, it has to change from the thinking, you know, that's like not how you change, you know, the structures of dramaturgy or like representation, or, you know, because these people at the end, they're still find that the piece is old, you know, or it has nothing to do with them, you know. So it's like, you know, it's very superficial, you know. So maybe you have to like then just take a piece of Pamuk, you know, whatever. Just like use, if you want a Turkish play, he's writing novels, but then adapt a novel into the stage. I don't know, like there's so much things people can do, and actually to make theater more dynamic, you know, and not just like, okay, you know, we're going to do it like it was done in 400 million years, you know. You have a lot of space for that too.
Let's keep in mind, investigate more, be more curious, find more spaces for writers, directors, and ensemble, the same, of course. Yeah. But
also maybe listen to more what the actors, you know, like if you have a more diverse cast, you know, and you start to look for like also, you know, from the schools already, you start to include like a more diverse, like, you know, like bring, you know, it's gonna, one thing brings the other, you know, like then, you know, you're gonna have younger actors who are like coming from the more diverse backgrounds, you know, and then these people will read different things, and then you will listen to them, and then, you know, slowly things will change, you know, like luckily not so slow, because it's been very slow actually already, you know. So, you know,
Farnas,
Yes, it's slow, but it is changing. I think also there are so many different ways to work with the diversity. Representation is one of them, to just count and see how many you have on stage, and also with the ushers, the people that the audience meet. But of course, it needs to go up on a higher level, and it needs to come out from the authors, from the directors, from the CEOs at the theaters. And this is a process that takes time. And another problem is that people at the theater think that they can just pick someone off the street and that they will have the same experience and the same quality as a person that has gone to a theater school and maybe even played theater as a child. The whole system is, we live in a society where racism is structural, and the whole system is created so that some people can get themselves up to the top levels. So this is something that we need to work with, I think, and try to create spaces and places and an infrastructure at the theaters where we can bring in young, talented people or emerging artists and give them the tools that they need. We can work with mentorship programs, we can work with in the different kinds of arts, and not just only actors. I mean, we have in Sweden, we have a lot of actors with that are not white, but the directors you can count on one hand, the authors as well, light designers, none that I know of, set designers, maybe one. So this is a problem that is in the whole of the theater and not just the visual parts. So this is something we can work on, and the stories that are told, of course, also. And that's also something that we can work with mentorships, we can work with writing programs, we can create educations, or I mean ways for people to come into the theater that are not the traditional, because it takes so much time to change the traditional ways. The schools are taking so much time to change who they are admitting and how they are working with it. And then even if you're admitted to a school, you're admitted into a school that works with a very Western white gaze on writing. So that's also a problem. You are admitted to a school, but then you feel like, okay, I was admitted here, but they want to change the whole way that I work, the whole way that I write. They want to change me. So why was I even admitted here? So we need to create those spaces and places and ways, the alternative ways to change, I think. And that's possible. And it's not even hard to do, because we have the competence and we have the professionalism in the theater. So we just need to open up and give it away and give our knowledge to people who can use it to move forward, because that's the only way to change, I think.
Yvette, do you know way? Yeah, please add what you're. And I'm also curious about. Do you know ways, innovative ways for people to come into the theaters? When you look at the whole world, you have been traveling and seeing where theater is. So, ways to have access and ways to have more diversity in the audience. Is there something like a best practice example you can imagine or you can remember?
Well, just firstly to pick up on what Farnas was saying, and I mean, you know, just I think that what that also does, I would totally agree with what she's just said. I think what that also does, though, is it requires us to think differently about how we view quality and what is quality, what is good, and really looking to decentralize the kind of white aesthetics, the Western aesthetics that, you know, have been normalized. And to challenge ourselves on that level, to challenge ourselves also in the ways of working that we find comfortable. And what that might mean is that we need deeper engagement, longer engagement around the work in order for the work to be truly meaningful, and in order to really create something which is uniquely harvesting the gifts of all, you know, the diverse participants in the process, essentially. So, you know, in other words, we've got to have more of a collective sense of co-creating, rather than a kind of a centralized single vision, you know, that knows where it's heading before it's before it's got there. So yeah, that sense of longer exploration, and I think that that's also a space that can potentially then be a space that gives training, gives support, gives development, you know, for people who have been outside the system in some way or another. And every theatre company could be doing that, you know, no matter how small. And I think that's my other point, is that actually we can look at all the best practice examples from around the world, but what's most important is that we apply something locally in our own context. It's only through actually doing the work that we learn to do the work, if you know what I mean. It's through engaging that we start to understand our particular context and how this needs to work in it. And I think my sense is sometimes that we all sort of are waiting for someone to show us the way, rather than diving in and maybe making the mistakes, you know, but in that process, hopefully becoming more inclusive and more diverse. In terms of whether there are, you know, particular ways of doing things, around the world that can act as, I mean, I think that there have been so many really good examples of solidarity, not necessarily from within the theatre movement, but for example, within the Black Lives Matter movement, or you know, within other kind of social activism movements that I think that theatre could be looking at. And I think that, you know, as I said earlier, in the end, there's not, we have to personalize our solutions. We have to look at our own context and what's going to work in our own context. But we can also develop a set of principles for how we want to work, that we can learn from others' experiences and try and avoid the mistakes that have been made.
Thank you. Julia, are there questions? There are a lot of questions, I think.
Yes, actually now it's really a big discussion, or there are lots of thoughts and comments being shared. But I think that by your last answers, Farnas and Yvette already answered a lot about like how to start, how to do this whole access thing if you have no idea, if you have no experience with this. I think this we have already answered, and there has been one thought, or two thoughts I would like to share. One is like, I think Farnas already mentioned that by changing the educational system, there was the question for if we change the education, the theater studies in German schools, for example, wouldn't it change a lot in the whole process, in the whole structures? This is one question. And another thought that I would like to share is the idea of, do we always need to be understood, and do we always need translation? Is one question. Like, if we want to get in touch with other cultures, with the other, is it really necessary that I have to translate, or is there a mutual understanding that maybe is not in the rational way we always think is needed?
Mm-hmm. So who wants to answer? About the educational system, of course, it's a very, we have only another, I don't know, 7 minutes to talk about the educational system in the theaters, and how this could be diverse and inclusive is a big issue. I don't know what experience, I think in Sweden are the same experience like in Germany, or mostly the same, I'm not sure, but I would like to hear more about, and I don't know where Constanza's actors are coming from, which schools, maybe mostly dancing schools, which are totally diverse. So it's a big issue, the educational system. Farnas?
Yeah, I also wanted to say something about language, because language is also a way of working with representation and inclusion, and language can often be a barrier at the theater, because theater is a very language-based art form. And I think this is also a reason why dance is more diverse, for example. And this has also been a problem with the theater schools, because they, for a long time, they didn't want to admit people that had an accent, that had maybe Swedish was their second language, or young people that grew up in the underprivileged areas that had a socialect or slang that would not be considered real Swedish or like theater language. But this is also something that we can work with at the theaters, trying to create more multilingual performances. I mean, a lot of children right now are living in a multilingual society. I myself was brought up bilingual, and I have a lot of friends as well who, I mean, children are used to hearing a lot of different languages in their world. So it wouldn't be strange for us to do that at the theater as well.
Mm.
Okay.
Constanza is in a Funkloch, so she can't answer, but maybe Yvette wants to step in.
She's offline. But about the, again, I try to talk about the educational system. I absolutely agree, Farnas, with the lingual, the language also as a barrier. And we could talk a lot about that. Still, I would go back to the idea that it could start with the educational system. If there are other people have access to writers workshops to director seminars and to actor schools, then it would be a whole totally different system, coming from the basis to up to the theaters.
Yeah, but I think also not being afraid to work in a multilingual context where you're not going to necessarily understand every word that somebody else is saying. That, you know, one of the beautiful things about theatre is that one can find new languages. And within the South African context, we've seen so much of that work. We have so many amazing theatre companies who've worked across languages, often using several different languages in a performance. Many of our actors are multilingual anyway, but beyond that, developing new ways of a theatre language, whether it's a symbolic language or a language that uses the body as well as sound or whatever, to find ways to communicate that, and that can be the richness of the diversity, is that actually using those languages not as a barrier but as a resource to really explore the uniqueness of everybody's contribution and our capacity to be fully human with one another.
So we slowly come to the end of this discussion, and we will start to go into breakout rooms where you all have the possibility to meet Farnas, Yvette, and hopefully Constanza in smaller rooms to have.
So choose. I don't hear nothing.
Yeah,
Hello?
Hello. Constanza,
Hello?
are you with us? Yeah.
I need your headphones.
Okay. So let's have a short last statements about what is important. If we had a very we touched a lot of issues, like investigate more different ways of representation, of changing the education. What is quality? The question of who is judging about quality, in which context, about engaging locally in your theater, doing mistakes, and developing also the languages which have no barriers, only by the one language. So there are many issues on the table. So I would like to ask you if you want to have a short summary for you. What was for you the most important point you would like to talk about in the breakout rooms? Maybe starting with Constanza, what would you like to talk in the breakout rooms when we can go a bit deeper into the discussion? You're muted. We can't hear you.
Hello, sorry, excuse me.
Yeah.
No, what I thought, I think it's, for me, the most important is what kind of questions are right. If there's any questions or anything that people wants to talk about, in this concern, because also that is interesting for me, because then I know what people wants to know. Like it just generates also like some kind of channel of thought, that also what. It's also nice when people come ask you things within the subject, because then you can also expand yourself and just also listen. It's a back and forth, no? You listen, because so many questions, they carry already a message, no? And that's interesting for me, because for me the theme of inclusion and diversity, which is for me accessibility, is a very important subject. So it's that will be something I would like to talk about, and it's something that is an endless learning highway, So I think this is a very good thing. That I would like to talk about mostly about that, basically.
And this is all about the breakout rooms, to hear the voices of the participants, not only our voices, to hear more voices, more diverse voices.
Exactly.
So, that's the wonderful opportunity to hear more suggestions and ideas.
Exactly.
Farnas?
Yeah, I'm with Constanza. I think the same. It depends completely on what I mean. We've dealt with so many topics here today, so it depends on what you want and what you need us to talk about. I think demystification was a really good word that Yvette used in the beginning, and I think for me that's something very important to continue to work with. And that's also something that you can work with not only towards the audience, but also if you don't know how to go about you want to change, but you don't know how. Open up, collaborate, bring in people, and just don't be afraid to show your work instead of living in the little theater bubble, because that won't change anything.
Yeah. And Yvette, what was the most inspiring word that you got on this morning?
Well, I think the word that hasn't been mentioned, but a word that's sitting with me right now is courage. You know, I think that this work takes courage, and I'd be interested to know what makes people feel afraid of entering the space, if they are afraid of entering the space, or what people or what motivates them to take that courage and move into a more diverse, more equitable, more accessible, inclusive way of working. So what would inspire us to do that, and what is preventing us from doing it? So yeah, I'd just be interested. I mean, coming as a complete outsider to Europe, I'd love to know that.
It's wonderful to have critical friends from outside. And I hope, of course, that we are not only discussing Europe, but also beyond the borders of Europe. This is so crucial in these times. So thank you, Constanza, Farnas, and Yvette for the first hour of our talk. Now we want to hear more voices. We go into 3 breakout rooms, and you can decide where you want to go. And I think Teresa, who is the host of this meeting, will explain us the way from the webinar to the Zoom meeting, because unfortunately now the live streaming is ending, because we want now to have space for questions and work together in the breakout rooms. So it was wonderful to have this discussion live streamed. Now we go into the Zoom meeting in 3 breakout rooms, and there you can choose, and Teresa will tell us how.
Exactly. Thank you, Stefan. I have just posted the message in the chat as well. So guest list participants within Zoom are now welcome to return to the auditorium on the forum platform. I have included the link on the side. You have to enter with your registered email address. And then you find the Zoom meeting link for the next hour in the auditorium. Once this webinar closes, please go to the auditorium for the next Zoom meeting link and join us there after a very short break, and then we will put you can choose which breakout room you would like to go to with Farnas, Constanza, or Yvette. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much from my side. It was a very inspiring talk. Thank you, 3 panelists, Farnas, Yvette, and Constanza, and we go on working on that. And of course, we have to come to the point that we say, if we identify the challenges, how can we go to action? So this is our task for the next, I don't know, for the next hour, the next day, and the next months, and the next year. Say what comes out of, what does that mean for political action? Maybe we can start in the breakout rooms with this question about how can we come from describing the landscape to actions for politicians.
Beautiful, Stefan. So
thank you very much. It was not about being beautiful, it was just about finding a good end.
And now we go to the breakout rooms, and please, I'm sorry we couldn't meet all the questions, but please take them to the breakout rooms, especially those for like support and political actions. As Stefan said, that will be a great issue to talk about in the next 40 minutes, and then we can see what we want to discuss in each individual group. Are we leaving? Yeah, and we're not changing the breakout rooms. So once you have decided to come in one breakout room, you will stay with this expert.